The crisp mountain air bit at Sarah Mitchell's cheeks as she stepped off the rickety bus onto the gravel road of Shadow Peak Village. The late September wind whispered through the towering pines, carrying with it the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the promise of adventure. Her hiking boots crunched against loose stones, the sound echoing off the weathered wooden buildings that lined the village's single main street. "Miss, you might want to reconsider going up there alone," called out a gravelly voice. Sarah turned to face Tom Henderson, the village's senior guide, his weather-beaten face creased with genuine concern. His calloused hands gripped the wooden railing of the tour office's porch, knuckles white with tension. Shadow Peak's got a different personality this time of year. The wildlife gets unpredictable. Sarah adjusted her backpack, feeling the familiar weight of her camera equipment shift against her spine. The setting sun painted the surrounding peaks in shades of amber and gold, creating the perfect lighting conditions she'd been dreaming of capturing. "I appreciate the concern, Mr. Henderson, but I've been photographing wildlife for 5 years now. I know how to handle myself in the backcountry." Tom's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon where dark clouds gathered ominously. 5 years in controlled environments ain't the same as Shadow Peak Wilderness, miss. We've got bears up there bigger than any you've seen in your nature magazines. And they ain't the docile kind you might be used to. The mention of bears sent a slight shiver down Sarah's spine, but she masked it with a confident smile. She'd photographed black bears in Yellowstone, grizzlies in Alaska. How different could these be? "I've got bear spray and I know the protocols. Besides, the best shots come when you're alone. Animals act different when there's a whole group trampling through their territory." A group of local hunters gathered at the general store's entrance caught her attention. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces serious as they pointed toward the mountain's higher elevations. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation, something about unusual animal behavior and missing livestock. Tom stepped down from the porch, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. "At least let me show you the marked trails. There's been some strange happenings lately. Bears acting out of character, moving in patterns we ain't seen before." He pulled out a worn map from his vest pocket, the corners dog-eared from frequent use. "If you're dead set on going up there, you need to know the safe zones." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement in her stomach. Unusual behavior meant unique photo opportunities, the kind that could finally land her that coveted National Geographic contract. Still, she accepted the map, noting the red X's marking recent bear sightings. "Stay on the main trail until you reach Crystal Creek," Tom instructed, his finger tracing the blue line that meandered across the paper. "After that, the terrain gets tricky. Easy to lose your bearings if you're not paying attention." The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant cry of an eagle. Sarah's camera seemed to grow heavier in her bag, eager to capture the raw beauty of this untamed wilderness. She memorized the trail markers Tom pointed out, noting the emergency shelter locations and the areas marked as high risk. As the day grew longer, Sarah found herself drawn to a narrow deer path that branched off from the main trail. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating ethereal spots of gold on the forest floor. Her photographer's instinct told her this was where the real magic happened, away from the beaten path where nature revealed its true face. The first sign that she'd ventured too far came when the marked trail blazes disappeared. The forest had transformed, becoming denser, more primeval. Ancient trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to create a natural path. Drought. The air grew thick with moisture, and the sounds of civilization faded into a primal symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Sarah checked her GPS, only to find the signal wavering. The screen flickered once, twice, then went dark. A knot of anxiety formed in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She was a professional. After all, she'd navigated worse situations. The snapping of a branch somewhere behind her froze Sarah mid-step. Her heart began to race as she slowly turned, expecting to see a deer or perhaps an elk. Instead, she found herself staring into empty forest, the shadows between the trees suddenly seeming deeper, more menacing. Another crack, closer this time. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the bear spray canister on her belt. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no insects, just the sound of her own breathing and the blood rushing in her ears. Through the trees, something massive moved. Sarah caught glimpses of dark fur, heard the soft thud of heavy paws on forest loam. Her mind raced through her training. Make yourself big, make noise, never run. But as the creature emerged from the shadows, all her training evaporated like morning mist. The bear that stood before her was unlike anything she'd encountered in her years of wildlife photography. It towered over her, its shoulders broader than any grizzly she'd ever seen. Its fur a unique shade that seemed to shift between dark brown and silver in the filtered sunlight. But it was the eyes that held her transfixed, intelligent, almost human-like in their intensity, studying her with an unsettling awareness. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for her camera, professional instinct momentarily overriding her fear. The bear's head tilted slightly, as if curious about her reaction. In that moment, time seemed to stop, the forest holding its breath as human and beast regarded each other across the ancient divide between civilization and wilderness. Then the spell broke. The bear moved with surprising speed for its size, closing the distance between them before Sarah could even think to raise the bear spray. Her world tilted sideways as massive paws gently but firmly gripped her, and the forest floor became a blur of green and brown. The last thing Sarah saw before darkness claimed her was the canopy rushing past overhead, and the oddly gentle way the bear cradled her as it carried her deeper into the heart of Shadow Peak's mysteries. Sarah's consciousness flickered like a candle in the wind, fragments of sensations piercing through the haze of her semi-conscious state. The rhythmic motion of being carried made her stomach lurch, but there was something oddly careful about the way the bear moved. Each step measured, deliberate, as if conscious of its precious cargo. The massive paws that could easily crush her instead held her with an almost tender restraint, like a mother cat carrying its kitten. Through half-lidded eyes, she caught glimpses of the forest transforming around them. The familiar mixed hardwoods gave way to older growth, trees so ancient their trunks were wider than cars. Moss hung in thick curtains from gnarled branches, creating an ethereal atmosphere that seemed to belong more in a fairy tale than the American wilderness. The light changed too, taking on a greenish quality as it filtered through the dense canopy overhead. The bear's fur brushed against her arm, surprisingly soft despite its coarse appearance. Each breath she took filled her lungs with its wild scent. Not unpleasant, but primal, like petrichor mixed with pine and something indefinably ancient. Her photographer's mind absurdly noted how the fur's color seemed to shift in the dappled sunlight, creating patterns that would have made for stunning photographs if she weren't currently being carried off to what might be her doom. Time lost all meaning in this strange journey. Sarah drifted in and out of awareness, her mind struggling to process the impossibility of her situation. In her more lucid moments, she noticed how the bear avoided the steeper slopes, choosing instead to wind along natural contours in the land. It moved with the certainty of one who had traveled this path countless times before, navigating the wilderness with a precision that spoke of intimate familiarity. The temperature dropped noticeably as they climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, carrying the crisp bite of approaching winter. Sarah's exposed skin prickled with goosebumps, but the bear's body heat kept the worst of the chill at bay. She found herself grateful for this inadvertent warmth, even as her rational mind screamed at the absurdity of feeling thankful to her captor. Shadows lengthened as the day progressed, and Sarah's fear began to transform into something more complex. The bear had had countless opportunities to harm her, but had shown nothing but careful restraint. Each time they crossed a particularly rough patch of terrain, the creature would adjust its grip to shield her from branches or protruding rocks. When they forded a shallow stream, it chose the smoothest crossing point, keeping her above the frigid mountain water. The forest character changed again as they entered what seemed to be a different ecological zone altogether. The trees here were more widely spaced, their trunks twisted by constant exposure to high-altitude winds. The ground beneath them became rockier, and Sarah could smell the distinct mineral scent of wet stone that suggested they were approaching the mountain's natural cave systems. Just as the last rays of sunlight began to fade from the sky, the bear made a turn into what appeared to be a solid rock face covered in trailing vines. But as they passed through the curtain of vegetation, Sarah realized they were entering a cave entrance that had been nearly invisible from the outside. The temperature dropped several degrees as they moved into the darkness, and the sounds of the forest became muffled, replaced by the soft drip of water on stone. The cave wasn't completely dark as she had feared. Here and there, gaps in the ceiling allowed shafts of fading daylight to penetrate, illuminating the space in a soft, diffused glow. The bear moved with confidence through this twilight realm, navigating twisting passages with the ease of long familiarity. The floor beneath its paws gradually smoothed out, suggesting years of regular use had worn down the natural roughness of the rock. After what seemed like an eternity of twists and turns, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in her surroundings. This wasn't the bare cave she had expected, but rather a space that showed signs of regular habitation. The floor was covered in a thick layer of soft moss and dry grasses, creating a natural carpet that looked surprisingly comfortable. In one corner, a small spring emerged from the rock face, providing a source of fresh water. The air was surprisingly warm and dry, protected from the mountain's harsh elements. The bear finally set her down on a particularly thick patch of moss, its movements still maintaining that inexplicable gentleness. Sarah immediately scrambled backward until her back pressed against the cave wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But the bear made no move to follow her. Instead, it settled itself near the cave's entrance, effectively blocking the only exit but otherwise showing no aggression. In the dim light, Sarah could now study her captor more clearly. The bear's size was even more impressive in the confined space of the cave, yet there was something about its posture that seemed almost protective rather than threatening. Its eyes, when they met hers, still held that unsettling intelligence she had noticed during their first encounter. The bear watched her with what could only be described as patience, as if waiting to see what she would do next. "So it's me." ND raced through her options, professional training warring with instinct and fear. Her bear spray was still attached to her belt. She could feel its reassuring weight against her hip, but something held her back from reaching for it. The bear's behavior defied everything she knew about these animals. There was purpose in its actions, a deliberateness that suggested this was more than just a random encounter. As if reading her thoughts, the bear shifted its position slightly, settling more comfortably onto its belly while maintaining its vigilant watch. The movement caused something to catch Sarah's eye, a pattern of scars across its shoulder that looked suspiciously like bullet wounds. These weren't fresh injuries, but they told a story of human encounter that might explain both the bear's unusual behavior and its choice of such a well-hidden den. The last light of day was fading fast now, turning the cave into a world of shadows and subtle movements. Sarah found herself studying every detail of her surroundings, her photographer's eye automatically cataloging everything that seemed out of place. There were marks on the walls that looked almost like crude drawings, though she couldn't make out their shapes in the growing darkness. Scattered around the edges of the chamber were various objects, bits of cloth, what looked like old tools, things that had no business being in a bear's den. A sound from outside the cave caught both her and the bear's attention, something moving through the forest, heavy and purposeful. The bear's ears flicked forward, its massive head turning toward the entrance. Its entire demeanor changed in an instant, muscles tensing as a low growl rumbled through its chest. Sarah felt her blood run cold as she realized that whatever was out there, it was enough to put this enormous creature on alert. The bear rose to its feet with surprising grace, moving to position itself more squarely in the cave's entrance. Its message was clear: nothing from outside would be getting in. As Sarah watched this display of protective behavior, a crazy thought began to form in her mind. What if the bear hadn't brought her here as prey, but as something to protect? The idea seemed absurd, yet it aligned with everything she had observed so far. As night settled fully over the mountain, Sarah found herself in a situation that defied all logic. Trapped in a cave with one of the largest bears she'd ever seen, yet somehow feeling safer than she had any right to. The sound of whatever had been moving outside gradually faded away, but the bear maintained its vigilant watch. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest, trying to process the events that had led her to this moment. She was cold, hungry, and terrified, yet beneath it all was a growing sense that she was part of something extraordinary, something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The bear's massive form silhouetted against the cave entrance became both her prison guard and protector as the mountain night enveloped them in its embrace. Sarah's last conscious thought before exhaustion finally claimed her was that if she survived this, it would make one hell of a story, assuming anyone would believe her. Sarah awoke to the sound of dripping water and the soft scrape of claws on stone. Her body ached from sleeping on the cave floor, despite the surprisingly comfortable moss beneath her. The pre-dawn light filtered through the cave's hidden crevices, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the rough walls. Her first instinct was to bolt upright, but years of wildlife photography had taught her the value of remaining still while assessing her surroundings. The bear was still there, its massive form now illuminated by the growing light. It moved with deliberate care around the cave's entrance, arranging what appeared to be fresh branches and leaves into a makeshift barrier. The behavior was so bear-like that Sarah found herself questioning her own sanity. Bears didn't create structures, they didn't arrange their surroundings with such obvious purpose. Yet here she was, witnessing exactly that. A distant howl echoed through the mountain air, causing the bear to pause in its work. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat as she recognized the sound. Wolf, but not like any wolf call she'd heard before. There was something almost desperate in its tone, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The bear's reaction was equally unsettling. Instead of showing aggression or concern, it seemed to listen intently, as if trying to decode a message in the haunting cry. Sarah's stomach growled loudly in the quiet cave, breaking the tension. The bear's head swiveled toward her, those intelligent eyes studying her with what she could have sworn was concern. To her amazement, it moved to a darkened corner of the cave and returned with something in its mouth, a cluster of fresh berries still attached to their branches. It placed them carefully within her reach before backing away to resume its guard position. "This can't be happening," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice sounding strange in the cave's acoustic space. The bear's ears twitched at the sound, but it made no other movement. With trembling hands, she reached for the berries. They were perfectly ripe mountain blackberries, their sweet tart flavor bursting across her tongue as she ate them carefully, watching the bear the entire time. As the morning light grew stronger, Sarah began to notice more details about her surroundings that she'd missed in the previous evening's darkness. The cave walls weren't just marked with random scratches. There were distinct patterns, some looking almost like primitive pictographs. Near the spring, she spotted what appeared to be man-made objects half buried in the sediment. Old tools, fragments of cloth, things that suggested this cave had once been used by humans. A particularly interesting marking caught her attention, a series of circular patterns that reminded her of astronomical charts she'd seen in Native American cave paintings. As she leaned closer to examine it, her movement caused her camera bag to shift, reminding her that she still had all her equipment. The photographer in her itched to document everything she was seeing, but she hesitated, unsure how the bear would react to the camera's presence. The bear seemed to sense her internal debate. It watched her with that same unnerving intelligence as she slowly, deliberately reached for her camera bag. When it made no move to stop her, Sarah carefully withdrew her professional-grade DSLR. The familiar weight of it in her hands brought a small measure of comfort, a connection to her normal life in this decidedly abnormal situation. She raised the camera slowly, keeping one eye on the bear. To her astonishment, it not only remained calm, but seemed to pose, shifting its position so the morning light caught its fur in a way that would make for a stunning photograph. Sarah's professional instincts took over, and she began capturing images of everything. The bear, the cave paintings, the mysterious artifacts scattered around the cave floor. As she photographed the wall markings, patterns began to emerge that made her breath catch. There was a story here, told in ancient symbols and crude drawings. One sequence showed a group of human figures standing before what appeared to be a much larger figure. Not quite human, not quite bear. Another depicted what looked like a transformation, a human form shifting into something else entirely. A sudden commotion outside the cave snapped Sarah's attention back to the present. The bear was on its feet instantly, its posture tense but not aggressive. Through the cave entrance, Sarah could hear multiple animals moving through the underbrush. Large animals from the sound of it. The bear turned to look at her, and in that moment, Sarah felt an almost telepathic command to stay still and quiet. The sounds grew closer, accompanied by deep, guttural vocalizations that didn't match any wildlife Sarah had ever encountered. The bear moved to the cave entrance, its massive form blocking most of the opening. What happened next would forever change Sarah's understanding of the natural world. The bear let out a series of complex vocalizations. Not roars or growls, but something that almost sounded like speech. The noises outside ceased immediately, followed by what seemed to be a response in kind. Sarah pressed herself against the cave wall, her camera clutched to her chest, as she realized she was witnessing some form of communication far beyond what science claimed possible. The exchange continued for several minutes, the sounds varying in pitch and rhythm in ways that suggested actual language rather than animal calls. Sarah's mind raced to make sense of what she was hearing. Her years of experience with wildlife told her this was impossible, yet her senses were telling her it was happening right in front of her. As the strange conversation concluded, the sounds of the other creatures gradually faded away. The bear remained at its post for several more minutes before finally relaxing its stance. When it turned back to Sarah, she could have sworn she saw something like relief in its expression. It moved to the spring, taking a long drink before settling down in a position that allowed it to watch both her and the cave entrance. Sarah's fingers moved automatically over her camera's controls, reviewing the images she'd captured. Each one was clear, detailed, irrefutable evidence of something extraordinary. The wall markings, the bear's unusual behavior, the artifacts. There was a story here bigger than anything she'd imagined when she'd set out to photograph wildlife on Shadow Peak. Her thoughts were interrupted by a new sound, one that made both her and the bear freeze in place. From somewhere deep in the mountain, beyond the cave's back wall, came the distinct echo of what sounded like human voices. The bear's reaction confirmed she wasn't imagining it. It rose quickly, moving to her side with clear purpose. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as the massive creature gently but firmly pressed against her, urging her toward a section of the cave wall she hadn't noticed before. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the beam of what had to be flashlights dancing along the cave walls. Sarah found herself being guided into a hidden crevice, the bear's bulk effectively concealing her from view. As she crouched in the darkness, trying to control her breathing, she realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just a witness to something extraordinary. She had become part of it. The beam of a flashlight swept across the main cave chamber, accompanied by the sound of boots on stone. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the crevice. The bear had positioned itself in such a way that it appeared to be simply resting, giving no indication of her presence. Through a tiny gap, she could see figures moving in the main chamber. People dressed in what looked like scientific or military gear, their movements precise and purposeful. "Signal strongest in here," a male voice announced, followed by the electronic beeping of some kind of device. But no sign of the subject. Just another bear den. Sarah's mind raced. What were they looking for? Who were these people? And most importantly, why was her Ursine captor so intent on keeping her hidden from them? The questions multiplied in her mind as she remained motionless in her hiding place, watching the drama unfold through her narrow viewpoint. She was no longer just trapped in a cave with a bear. She had stumbled into something far more complex and mysterious than she could have imagined. The search team lingered in the cave for what felt like hours, though Sarah's watch too. LD heard had only been 20 minutes. Her muscles screamed from maintaining her cramped position in the crevice, but fear kept her absolutely still. The bear remained motionless as well, its massive body providing the perfect screen for her hiding spot. Its calm demeanor in the face of armed intruders seemed increasingly deliberate, almost practiced. "Sweep the perimeter again," ordered a sharp female voice that carried the weight of authority. Dr. Reynolds swears the signal originated from this location. There has to be something we're missing. The sound of equipment being shifted echoed through the cave. Sarah could make out the shapes of at least 4 people through her limited view. They moved with military precision, their gear far more sophisticated than anything typical park rangers or wildlife services would carry. One of them held what looked like a tablet, its screen casting a blue glow on his face as he studied it intently. "Ma'am, the readings are off the charts in here," he reported, walking slowly around the chamber. "But it's like trying to pinpoint a radio signal in a hall of mirrors. The cave system must be affecting the equipment." Sarah's photographer's eye couldn't help but notice details about the intruders. Their unmarked black uniforms, the strange symbols on their equipment that didn't match any government agency she knew of, the way they gave the bear a wider berth than experienced wildlife handlers would. They seemed more wary of it than they should be, as if they knew it wasn't just an ordinary bear. The tablet-wielding man approached their hiding spot, his device beeping more rapidly. Sarah's heart threatened to burst from her chest as he came within feet of the crevice. The bear shifted slightly, a movement so subtle it appeared natural, but it effectively blocked the man's path. He hesitated, then backed away, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that looked oddly like fear. "The subject's not here," the woman finally declared. "Log the coordinates and mark it for further investigation. We'll send in a full research team once we've cleared the area." As the team began to pack up their equipment, Sarah noticed one of them placing small devices at various points around the cave. They looked like sensors of some kind, barely visible against the dark rock. The bear saw them too. She felt its muscles tense against her. The sound of boots on stone gradually faded as the team departed, but neither Sarah nor the bear moved for several long minutes afterward. When the bear finally stepped away from the crevice, Sarah nearly collapsed as she unfolded herself from her hiding position. Her legs had gone numb, and pins and needles shot through her feet as circulation returned. "What was that about?" she whispered, not really expecting an answer. The bear's response shocked her to her core. It walked to each of the sensors the team had left behind and systematically destroyed them, crushing each one with precise bites that spoke of previous experience with such devices. Sarah's mind whirled with implications. The bear's behavior was too specific, too purposeful to be instinctual. It understood human technology well enough to recognize surveillance equipment. It had hidden her from what was clearly some kind of covert research team. None of this fit with anything she knew about wildlife behavior. Moving to her camera bag, Sarah pulled out her laptop. If she couldn't make sense of what was happening, maybe she could at least document it. As she waited for the computer to boot up, she began transferring photos from her camera's memory card. The images were extraordinary. The cave paintings, the artifacts, and most importantly, clear shots of the bear's unusual behavior. The bear watched her work with what seemed like approval, settling down nearby, but maintaining a clear view of the cave entrance. Sarah took advantage of its apparent comfort with her documentation to begin writing video as well, narrating her observations in hushed tones. "Day 2 of whatever this is," she whispered into the camera's microphone. "I'm being held, no, protected, by what appears to be a highly intelligent bear in a cave on Shadow Peak. About 20 minutes ago, an unidentified research team searched this location. They were looking for something they called the subject, using equipment I've never seen before." As she spoke, the bear's ears perked up at certain words, another behavior that seemed impossible, yet was happening right in front of her lens. Sarah continued her documentation, describing everything she'd witnessed since being brought to the cave. The more she talked, the more patterns began emerging in her mind. The wall markings told a story. That much was clear. But it wasn't just ancient history. Some of the marks were newer, different in style. Sarah's camera had captured details her eyes had missed, and as she reviewed the images on her laptop screen, she began to see a progression. The oldest markings showed transformation scenes, humans becoming something else. The newer ones depicted what looked like conflict, battles between transformed beings and groups of humans carrying devices similar to what the search team had been using. A particularly clear image caught her attention. It showed a figure that seemed to be half human, half bear, surrounded by symbols she recognized from her limited knowledge of Native American medicine wheels. Below, it was a series of markings that looked almost like coordinates. Sarah's fingers flew across her laptop's keyboard as she cross-referenced the markings with topographical maps of the area. The bear moved closer, watching the screen with obvious interest. When a match appeared, a location deep in the wilderness where several ley lines intersected according to local legends, the bear made a soft sound that could only be described as affirmative. "You want me to help you, don't you?" Sarah asked, turning to face the creature. "That's why you brought me here. You need someone who can document this, someone who can tell your story." The bear's eyes met hers, and in that moment, Sarah felt the last of her doubts fade away. Whatever was happening on Shadow Peak, whatever this bear truly was, she had been chosen to uncover the truth. Her camera was no longer just a tool for capturing wildlife images. It had become a key to unlocking a mystery that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. A new sound echoed through the cave, different from both the wolf calls and the search team's activities. It was a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The bear's posture changed immediately, becoming more alert but not aggressive. Sarah felt something too, a vibration that went beyond physical sensation, as if the sound was calling to something deep within her. As she watched, the bear began moving deeper into the cave system, clearly expecting her to follow. Sarah quickly packed her equipment, making sure everything was secure. Whatever was about to happen, she was determined to document every moment of it. She had come to Shadow Peak looking for unique wildlife photographs. Instead, she had stumbled upon what might be the story of the century, if she lived to tell it. The bear led her down a passage she hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to spiral downward into the heart of the mountain. The walls here were covered in more markings, these ones glowing faintly with a phosphorescence that cast everything in an ethereal blue light. Sarah's camera clicked steadily as they descended, capturing images that would either make her career or get her labeled as a fraud, if anyone ever saw them.